Hello friends, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And if you're new, hi, my name is Olivia, and I'm so very glad that you decided to click on this video today to enjoy a wonderful bedtime ASMR biblio-mystery. So this video will be in two parts. We'll read half of the short story today, and the rest of the short story will be coming next week. I really do hope that you guys enjoy this video. I hope that it brings you comfort and peace as you get cozy tonight and lay your head down to go to sleep. Grab your AirPods or headphones, anything you desire, a nice warm cup of tea and a cozy blanket, and we can get started. This will give you a little precursor to what Vlogmas 2022 will look like this year. I have a goal to read Harry Potter, which I've never read before. I know, I can't believe it either, but I'm really excited to dive into that series with you guys in December. And if you like it, maybe we'll continue with the entire series into next year. So, without further ado, let's jump straight into the ASMR bedtime reading of this biblio-mystery, The Book Club by Lauren D. Eastelman. Chief Doherty knew the shadiest spot in New Mexico wasn't the Santa Rita copper mine in Silver City. It was right there in the town of Good Advice, and it belonged to Avery Sharecross Bookshop. Sharecross had established it years before many of the residents were born, in a 300-year-old mission that had been by turns a community theater, a Salvation Army shelter, a home for armadillos, and a place for juvenile delinquents to smoke cigarettes and listen to rock and roll. Its walls were adobe, 3 feet thick, its few windows just large enough to shoot Indians from inside without attracting too many arrows from outside. During its empty period, it had been as dark and mossy, feeling as a cave. Sharecross had managed to make it darker still by installing towering bookcases and stocking them with volumes, some the same vintage as the building. With narrow passages between the cases, generations of children had dared one another to approach the place after dark, when the ghost of William Shakespeare and Mark Twain prowled among the stacks, or during the day when the proprietor did the haunting, none accepted. Even at high noon, a visitor needed a flashlight to explore the place without running into a Thackeray of Gibbon or cracking a tooth. Fortunately for the chief's new bridge, the bookseller had suspended truff lights from the distant ceiling, with chain switches for the convenience of the browsers, who were requested by hand-lettered cardboard signs posted throughout the store to turn them off when they moved from aisle to the next. The fluorescent tubes flickered and buzzed when they activated and spilled watery illumination into many centuries of literature, but not quite as far as the plank floor, which was heaped with books on both sides of the passages, narrowing the avenues even further. Dockery groped his way forward with his feet to avoid kicking them over. The cases were ancient, built of old-growth oak from the east, and gray with the accumulation of dust that had worked its way deep into the grain. Although the proprietor was scrupulous with a duster so that none of his patrons would shun the place to keep from smearing his best suit or Hoonier dress, the pulverized bones of the prehistoric buffalo and the extinct Indian tribes that made up the Santa Fe Trail would not be prevented entrance, either to the shop or Chief Dockery's nostrils. Sneeze, blow nose, creep forward, repeat. A reader of bulletins and arrest reports exclusively, he hadn't visited the place often, and not in months. He had only a vague memory of the layout, and Chaircross's regard for his customers did not extend to sparing them the annoyance of the occasional dead-end aisles that were open on both ends, alternated with those whose exits were sealed with perpendicular bookcases. As the bookseller was constantly rearranging his stock and changing how it displayed, even a Daniel Boone would find himself retracing his footsteps and muttering all the way. But it was a Tuesday, and therefore a lucky one for the Chief of Good Advice Police Department. 5 officers, 3 of them part-timers. That was the day the book club gathered to drink iced tea, eat lemon cookies, and talk about plot, theme, and character. All he had to do was follow the murmur of voices. Well, I hated it. 600 pages of dancing bears and a boy biting a dog. This was Uncle Ned Schofield, whose 99-year-old voice cracked as the air whistled through his dentures. It isn't just about that, Ned. Garp's a tragic hero. Bertie Flatt retired after 40 years when the phone company yanked out the old switchboard. Doherty knew her shrill tones from every call he'd placed when he was patrolman new to the force. Someone else snorted. That would be Carl Lathrop, head of the town council, who overrode hecklers at meetings by the way of his expressive nasal passages. He's a cartoon character. Not every book is Wuthering Heights. The dancing bears is simple folks, said another man whose voice the chief couldn't peg right away. Irving's making a point about the folly of human nature. Ned put in another 2 cents worth. Symbols, schmimbles. Leave it to a newspaperman to like a book about a boy biting a dog. That made the other man Golden Toe Oliver, the publisher of Good Advice, a weekly popularly believed to have been founded by Horace Greenlee. At 50, he had been the youngest member of the club. There followed a lively exchange of views, simultaneous and pierced through by Bertie's stridor. Friends, friends, Chaircross' ready tenor quieted the tumult. This is a literary discussion, not a professional wrestling, Ned. There's no great deal more to the world according to the Garp than a boy biting a dog, which you'd know if you'd read past the opening chapters instead of just counting the pages. Miss Flatt, he's not quite a figure of tragedy, because the book is intended as a black comedy, and you can't have both on the same stage at the same time. Neither is he a cartoon character, Carl. He's too fleshed out for that, Gordon. It pains me to tell you that. The dancing bear is just a dancing bear. There's one in nearly every book of Irving's writings. It's his trademark, like Poe's gloomy tarn and Ayn Rand's monologues. Next time, let's read Louis L'Amour, said Uncle Ned. His dogs don't get bit, and his bears don't do the polka. Let's mix it up a bit. Each of you pick a book, and we'll compare the various merits and shortcomings next week. Don't forget to mark it in the ledger before you go. Dockery emerged from the literary labyrinth just as the group was rising from its folding chairs. Chaircross, who'd been holding the court from behind his massive desk, as old and gray as the bookshelves, hell, as old as him, thought the chief, got up from his wooden swivel to greet his visitor. The others nodded greetings, each preoccupied with his or her quest among the stock. A pleasant surprise, Chief. Have I persuaded you to join us at last? An experienced criminologist will be valuable when we take on Ed McBain. The bookseller resembled a character of trade, gaunt with hair of gray to match his shelves straggling to his collar, thick spectacles and limbs like bent pipe cleaners, his knees and elbows trying to gnaw through the rusty black wooden suit he wore even when the temperature topped at 100. Now that he had thought about it, Dockery had never seen a man sweat. If someone fetched him a hard blow, his pores would release only dry air and desiccated bindings. "I'm a cop, not a detective," the chief said. "That's your specialty." "I've been a bookseller longer than I was a detective." Back then, DNA stood for Do Not Arrest. The captain had a blind spot where his son was concerned. In the beginning, Dockery had had trouble picturing this elderly scarecrow collaring and interrogating suspects. Any Hollywood studio would have cast him as an absent-minded ascetic in some musty archive. Then he'd Google Shawcross's name and spent 20 minutes reading commendations and looking at the pictures of him shaking hands with the U.S. Attorney General and FBI Director and the graduating class of the New York Police Academy. In one shot, with a chest full of medals and a police commissioner placing a ribbon around his neck, ending in yet another decoration, his dress uniform appeared to be wearing him rather than the other way around. Even back then, he looked like an assistant professor employed by a not very distinguished university. 20 years into his own career, the chief had learned the first lesson of police work: do not judge a man by his appearance. "I'm not here to join your book club, Avery. It's official business." Shawcross raised his voice a decibel. "I don't have that one in stock, but I'm attending an estate sale in Albuquerque next week. I'll look for it." Dockery was confused, then aware of Lathrop, the last book club member present, letting himself out the door. When it shut behind him, jangling the copper bell attached to it, the bookseller said, "The city council has a right to discuss police business, but I assume you'd rather keep it off the table this early in the investigation." The chief nodded, embarrassed that he hadn't thought of it himself. "It's Lloyd Fisher." "Lloyd's my best customer. What has happened?" "Accident, I hope, though it looks like a murder." "Dear me." Not the usual response from an experienced detective, but then Shawcross wasn't your usual detective. Lloyd Fisher had been born in Good Advice, the 5th generation in his family to first see the light in the rambling Victorian pile on the hill overlooking the town. His great-great-grandfather had brought a railroad, and with it, prosperity to the town and himself. Rather than desert when the local economy went into decline 100 years later, Lloyd stayed on, using a great deal of his inheritance to build one of the finest book collections in private hands. His interests ran towards the history of the Southwest, and Shawcross had been instrumental in helping him stock his shelves. Their friendship had survived the onslaught of the internet. Rather than co-sign his research for the rare, obscure titles to a soulless electronic machine, Fisher preferred to continue a relationship that had outlasted his own marriage, which had ended in a widowhood many years before. "I'll print out these pictures at the station." Andy Barlow, the deputy chief, gestured with the digital camera in his hand. "I got every angle." "Okay, Trolliver will be all over you for the print as soon as he hears about it. I'll decide which he can put in the paper. I don't want this showing up on the front page." As he spoke, Dockery inclined his head toward the sheet-covered figure on the floor. "He'll turn that rag into a tabloid if he gets half a chance." Barlow left. Apart from the number of the variety of volumes present, Fisher's private library bore no resemblance to the bookshop where he had acquired so many of its titles. Mahogany bookshelves, intricately carved by long-dead Mexican artisan, walled its 700 square feet all the way to 12-foot ceilings, holding several thousand volumes, bound in leather, buckram, and parchment, all upright and level, with spaces left here and there for future acquisitions, which now would never be made. A ladder made of the same wood stood against one wall, fitted into the ceiling track that allowed it to be moved into position to retrieve books from the upper shelves. The collector's desk of mahogany also contained a banker's lamp and more books in stacks, and an armchair upholstered in maroon full-grain leather stood in each corner aside the tall reading lamp. The air smelled pleasantly of paper and leather in various stages of gentle decay. In fact, the only thing untidy about the room was the corpse under the sheet. Shawcross knelt and lifted the sheet with a half-hopeful expression, as if it might not be his old friend and fellow bibliophile lying there with a cracked skull. He let the sheet fall back into place and rose, his knees creaking in disappointment on his emaciated face. "His housekeeper called us," Dockery said. "She found him about an hour ago when she came to clean. It broke her up bad. Doc Simon has her under sedation." "Poor Greta. She doesn't sleep here, does she?" "She lives with her sister in town. She wasn't here when it happened. The doc swears that. He figures Fisher was dead at least 2 hours when he examined him. Blunt instruments trauma probably caused of death, but he won't answer to it till the autopsy. I wanted you to see the body before I had it taken away." "No need. I took your word for it. He's dead." Shawcross walked around the room, looking up toward the top of the shelves, where various objects stood in a space between them and the ceiling. "We thought of that," Dockery said. "Maybe one of those doodads fell off and hit him on the noggin, but there wasn't anything on the floor. And the angle's all wrong. He was hit on the back of the head with something hard and heavy, enough to cave in the skull. Whoever did it didn't leave it behind." "I wasn't looking for what killed him." "Then what?" The bookseller stepped back into the body, placing the toes of his shoes in line with the soles of Fisher's. He stood here, a few yards inside the door. Either someone was waiting, possibly hidden behind the door, or it was someone he knew and trusted, at least not to attack him. The blow was struck from behind and he fell forward on his face. "Tell me, if you think I'm wrong, I'm a bit rusty, I'm afraid." "Rusty as a brand new Swiss watch," the chief thought. "Works for me. I sure hope it was someone hiding behind the door, burglar passing through. I wouldn't want to think we've got a murderer living here." "They have to live somewhere. What about that?" he pointed. Dockery followed the ankle of his finger, but all he saw was a shelf about 9 feet from the floor. He said so. "There's a space between those 2 books." "There's spaces all over. I guess he didn't want to have to rearrange the whole library to make room for a new book. I'll be darned if I can figure out his system. He must have had one. Mr. Fisher was tidy about everything. He arranged them chronologically, beginning with the earliest Spanish explorations all the way to the recent changes made by state legislatures. But as you see, the spaces he left are wider to accommodate several books at a time. This gap is approximately the width of 2 books of ordinary width, or perhaps one larger one. It's the only example in the room, and it suggests a book's missing. Maybe it belonged to 1 or 2 of the books on the desk. No, I looked at those. They're reference works, common in the book trade. I have them as well. They're consulted so often it only makes sense to keep them handy rather than constantly be climbing the ladder to retrieve them. Certainly not from the shelf so high up. I'm sure you know where I'm heading." "Well, robbery's a motive I can wrap my head around. You think he surprised somebody while he was stealing the book that belonged there? If Lloyd came back unexpectedly, trapping the thief in the library, forcing him to hide behind the door and strike him just after he came in, that certainly suggests itself. It could just as easily be someone he knew. The moment he turned his back, the thief hit him and stole the book. I like the first theory, not just because I don't want the killer to be one of ours. It makes it an act of desperation, not planning. He might have wanted just to knock him out so he could make his escape." Shawcross took off his glasses to wipe them with a handkerchief. Unlike the case with most nearsighted men, his eyes looked sharper when they were naked. He resembled an old and seasoned eagle. "The only thing that argues against it is, what became of the weapon? It isn't one of the objects in this room. I hardly think, having eliminated the threat to his freedom and acquired what he came for, he'd stop to put the weapon back. If, on the other hand, he brought it with him, and it becomes a cold-blooded act." Fingerprints. I was trained to think like a murderer. I'd wipe them off rather than take the chances of being seen on the street carrying a bronze vase or a marble bust. DNA, possibly. As I said, I'm far from current. He hooked on his spectacles. Wasn't Lloyd interviewed recently by a television crew? Yeah, big to-do when a network van rolls into town this little. Some kind of reality show. Like Hoarders, only high-end, rich collectors. It was what you call a pilot, hoping to become a series. Not an unlikely procession in many cases. The only difference between a wealthy bibliomaniac and somebody's mother-in-law living in an apartment full of old newspapers and empty pop bottles is the size of the investment. Sort of a nutjob lifestyle of the rich and famous. Shawcross looked pained. I'd hate to see that adjective applied to Lloyd. The reason I brought it up? For once, we're neck to neck. I'll see about getting the TV footage, and we'll compare it to the crime scene. If the picture is sharp enough, we'll see what was in that gap. If Mr. Fisher didn't overhaul the library in the meantime. I doubt it. It looks the same as the last time I visited him, and as we've discussed, he had the foresight to prevent the extensive reorganization. The bookseller's tone was wistful. Cheer up, Avery. One morning you'll hop out of bed, raring to give your place a good old-fashioned spring cleaning. That's the pep talk I've been giving myself for 30 years. Okay, friends, that's where we'll end off, and we'll finish the rest next Tuesday, so stay tuned. I really hope that you enjoyed the book today. I really enjoyed reading this to you guys, and I hope it made you feel cozy and relaxed as you climb into your bed tonight and go to sleep. So if you would be so kind to give this video a thumbs up, hit your notification bell so you can be notified every single time I post a video, subscribe, and comment down below if you enjoy ASMR bedtime reading, because I would love to continue this if it brings you peace, comfort, and joy. So, until next time, bye friends.